Please welcome Dan, Olav, and Dale to the S4 main stage.
So I'm very excited to talk with Dan and Olav about this issue, but I wanted to, before we got into the conversation, I wanted to actually give you an example of a technical, let's say, special access feature that we're talking about. So we have a short video for you here as an example.
So this is a Siemens S7 1200. We have the processor is a ARM Cortex R4, the RAM, and the NAND flash. However, there is another part of the PLC, basically the bootloader, which is in the back. This is not code which is being updated or provided in the Siemens website, so you have to take it out. This is the other parts, components, like all power management part of the PLC, which is not important for us. So basically this is the motherboard, and in the back side of the motherboard, there is a small tiny chip here, this one. The way it's activated is that it waits for half a second, and once it receives, like within this half a second, it have to receive basically this MFGT1, and once it receives this MFGT1 in half a second, it basically respond with CPU1 and then provide you these functionalities which you have. There are also some weird things happening here. So for us, it's like, for example, printing the current content of the flash to the UART. So this is basically printing the bootloader contents, right? And another one is committing flash update, and that's not good because basically you can write to NAND flash.
Just this is some research that Ali Abbasi did and Tobias and some of his students did, and there's actually going to be a very detailed technical session tomorrow, 10:45 on stage 2. But just in brief, what they found was in the bootloader chip, which by the way would not be updated with a firmware update, there was an undocumented special access feature that if you sent the right string of bits in the first half second at boot, it gave you the capability to do whatever you wanted to do to modify the device in any way. Basically the full set of functions you would ever want in the device. And neither the researchers nor I am claiming that this is a nation-state attack, but it is the kind of special access feature that someone might want to put into a product if they were ever going to want to change it for selected customers. So I brought these two gentlemen in this panel. Dan Geer, I probably don't even need to tell you why I wanted him on this panel. He's written so much. He's really one of the people we look to for guidance looking forward. And when I told Dan we're going to have this panel, I want him on the panel, he suggested Olav, because Olav wrote the book that you saw up there, and I read the book and I understood exactly why Dan said he should be on this stage, because he dealt with this exact issue. You know, early on he talks about it here, that the vendor and the customer, the asset owner in our term, enter into this long-term relationship, and over time they may not have the same interests, and the vendor may have some reasons to do things that are not necessarily in the asset owner's best interest. So Olav, why don't we start with this? Why would a vendor even consider working with a government or other entity to provide them with some sort of special access feature? Why would they even consider doing this? What are some of the reasons?
Well, first of all, I need to thank you for having me here, and for Dan for recommending me. It's a great pleasure being here. Then to the question, I think this is mainly down to coercion. And the situation may differ, of course. You may be pressured by the country that you operate from, which is what we fear that Huawei is being. Or you may be pressured by the country where you want to operate in or sell to. And we've seen examples of that as well, where companies are forced to help the countries they operate in to control their own population, for instance. It could even be pressure by customers, and finally there may be financial reasons why you want to do it yourself. It's not exactly cybersecurity, but if you think through the Dieselgate scandal, what you saw there was that Volkswagen had some functionality in their chips that helped them sell cars in the US. It is not exactly cybersecurity, but it's sort of the same thing. It is a company that did something to the hardware, sold it to their customer, and there were functionality there that were contrary to their expectations and interests. So I think there are many reasons why this may happen. To what extent it actually does happen, however, is more of an not as obvious question, because much of these things obviously happens in the dark.
Dan, do you have any other thoughts on why a company might take the risk to do something like this?
If they are a global organization, they are dealing with countries that are arguably not friends with each other. And so it seems the conservative assumption that from time to time, we need you to do us a special favor would show up in a conversation. Or more to the point, it would not show up in a conversation. The whispering of, we need you to do us a special favor, I suspect is a constant. If you want to call it bribery, you can. I'm willing to call it that. But it's, look, if you're going to operate here, we have rules. Our rules include this, this, and this. I would be shocked if such conversations didn't occur. Now, how do you react to that? In the long run, I suspect that you do what in the financial service world has been done for a long time, and that is there's not one entity, there's a holding company, or for that matter, Google, Alphabet has become a holding company. The idea that you would have separate divisions who might or might not be cooperating with each other, might or might not turn in products and the like that interoperate with each other at certain levels, might or might not, in this case, work with bigger customers that demand certain features. I think it's from a security person's point of view, I think it's a conservative assumption to imagine that that is the case.
You know, you use the term bribery. I think that's interesting. We can imagine there's some countries where you have less choice whether you want to play ball.
I don't know where bribery and...
But I could see bribery. The reason that caught my attention was if you have a government and you get a lot of business from the government, then you could be more inclined to listen to them when they ask you a favor because they're one of your top customers, as opposed to maybe a country where there's a little more of a stick that says you must do this.
Yes, all I'm suggesting is the nature of such inducements isn't necessarily a paper bag full of cash. It might be something else. And why would I not assume that to be the case if I am like most of you, a professional paranoid?
I think also it's important to state that countries are very different here. I come from Europe, and I've been talking to several European governments on the issue of 5G equipment and selling to Huawei. And a lot of the discussion in Europe is circles around the fact that there is a security act, there is legislation in China that allows for the government to force companies to comply if the government asks for those kind of favors. That discussion is, however, not very important, I think, because you can never, whether that legislation was there or wasn't there, will not change anything in respect to the power that the government has in China. You can never sue the government in China in any meaningful way. You could sue the government here in the United States in some meaningful way if they did something that was not right. So countries are extremely different in that respect, and that also plays out in how this discussion goes in Europe.
If we just tease this out a little bit more, you know, we're talking about some level of cooperation, and there's probably a spectrum, right? There's give us your documentation, tell us who you're shipping to when, give us access to your factory for a period of time before you ship, let us, you know, do something to the design. There's this whole spectrum.
Let me make your spectrum slightly larger. Suppose a official at some level comes to you and says, we've discovered a flaw we're requiring you not to fix it. Now that's the most subtle one I can think of. We found something, it's here, so that you know, but we are commanding you not to fix it.
So do we think that what kind of decisions can be made in these? We're still looking at it from the vendor perspective. What kind of decisions can they make in these situations when a government's coming to them? And
If somebody tells me, here's something you didn't know about, and we're commanding you not to fix it, I think most corporate counsels, most corporate lawyers would at least say, don't touch it. We have deniability, and we have a command.
And I think deniability here is really, really key. If I run a company, big company, and I'm put under that kind of pressure, and I decide I have to yield, okay. The first thing I would like to do is to go into negotiations to make sure that whenever I yield in such a way that if caught, then I can deny any knowledge. And there are, again, we're in the realm of speculations here. It's been a case that Cisco has been in. We've seen a case more recently of Supermicro, which is a Chinese company. And what they have been sort of accused of doing, when you look at it from a technological perspective, it looks rather clumsy, right? You don't understand why do they do it like that. They put something onto the boards that are actually visible to the naked eye. The nice thing about that is that, well, whatever the story is, I don't know, but it gives deniability, right? It gives the possibility to say, well, I had nothing to do with this. This happened in shipment. And it's easy to sort of see how a conversation could lead in that direction, right? If I yield on this, I need it to be done in this way so that if something goes wrong, I can deny knowledge. I think that happens.
And do you think in the cases that you mentioned and the ones that you could foresee, do you see a case where you might lose customer support or it might actually affect your business? Because in the example we saw here, and again, I don't know that this wasn't a Siemens maintenance feature. I just know that it would be very useful to other people besides Siemens in this case. They have deniability here. I don't think it will affect their business at all that this feature exists.
It's often stated that no one would do anything wrong because if caught, they would lose business. And I suspect that is true to a significant extent. But there are examples, and the Cisco case is one, where the official statement is that, well, they didn't lose business. What is the truth here? I don't really know. But the risk of losing business as a security barrier seems to have its limitations, and I think we should be aware of that.
Dan, would you agree with that? Do you think the risk of getting caught is something that would impact a company's business or not? I guess it's a difference between the technical feature being caught or being caught in this effort.
Would I disagree? Only in part. I can well imagine, and I would consider it almost arguably legitimate for someone to say, we're going to use this in nation-critical infrastructure, whatever this device is. And the practical fact of that is we're going to depend on it at a level at which the ability to do a remote upgrade is a condition of our committing to this. I'm speaking as a government official here, shall we say. We're going to commit to this. We're going to commit to it in a way that makes it critical to us. You will put in an ability that allows us to do a remote upgrade, and you will not document it. Now, you showed an undocumented feature. Suppose someone comes to me and says, we know about your undocumented feature, and we are going to require you not to document it if we're going to commit to using your gear in our truly critical. I'm not just using the word critical as a kind of adjective. I'm using it as a true statement, true critical infrastructure. You know, I would consider that quite possibly legitimate. I mean, I can well imagine that that there are products for which, in just the normal world, you should not use them if you don't know what you're doing. There's lots of those in the real world. You know, don't do this if you haven't been trained. Do you want to argue that that's a level of training? Well, you know, now I'm talking like a lawyer, but yeah, you could argue it's a level of training. But I don't think it's implausible to imagine that we're going to commit to you, and we're going to require that we have an ability to do something that even if you as a company die, we can still do this upgrade or turn off or whatever it is. And we require you not to document it. I think that's entirely plausible. It would surprise me if it hasn't already happened.
Let's stay on the vendors just a little bit longer before we move the asset owners. We have a lot of them here in the audience. A lot of them do business globally. So,
sure.
You know, in countries that, as you and I have been referring to, maybe they're on different teams in whatever sort of competition we're talking about. How is a vendor to deal with, a global vendor to deal with the issue where they might have multiple knocks on the door saying, we want this that could be competitive? How do they deal with that? Do they have to pick a team? Can they be on multiple teams? What are we expecting? Olaf, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've been given that some thought. And luckily I'm an academic professor, right? So I don't get into these situations. I'm glad I don't. But putting myself into that situation for a moment, it sort of, to me, it looks like game theory in a sense. Why are they asking for this feature? What answer would they like me to give? Would they like me now to give the answer that, yes, I comply? Or would they like me to give the answer that, no, I will under no circumstances comply, because that signals that I would not comply to others either, that they might fear, other countries either, that they might fear. So it's not an easy situation to be in. But I guess most countries would have to, most companies will handle those situations extremely carefully.
Extremely carefully. Do you have any more concrete? That one, I maybe dig into that.
I'd like to actually push you a little bit.
Yeah.
If you are a country that is not big enough to push the other ones around, what do you say? Or how do you choose? You know, do you choose a supplier? I'm picking on this gentleman here. Do you choose a supplier based on whose vulnerabilities and remote access paths you're willing to tolerate?
That's a very good question. I'm talking to, being from Europe, and I've talked to government officials from many countries on an issue that is currently very hot in Europe, which is who get your contract for 5G networks. And there are several camps, and one camp will definitely give the answer that you now imply, that we will rather choose we would rather choose equipment that has been produced or at least labeled in our own sphere of security, if you will, in a NATO country, just to be very open about that. Whereas others will answer that, well, we will have to use diversity here. We will have to think through a situation where one supplier, regardless of where that supplier comes from, turns out not to be trusted. And then we need to be able to look at our infrastructure and see that we'll still have something that we're there to use, even to the extent that the equipment from one untrusted provider at some time can be turned off. Those are two camps. And if you look through the countries in Europe now that are in exactly the situation you now describe, there are small countries who can easily be pushed around. They fall in either one or two of those categories, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Well, which is what I think that's parallel to the idea that a transnational might want to divisionalize so that they have I'm just picking on them, a Bulgarian division and a South African division and a Vietnamese division and so forth. I don't know anything when I say that. I'm just picking countries. But the idea that that whatever pressure they were subject to wouldn't spread to other parts of the world, that they would have if you want to think of that, an organizational firewall.
Are you talking about transnational vendor or customer?
Vendor.
Wouldn't
Vendor.
you?
I'm just saying it's parallel
Yeah.
to this question here.
Wouldn't you be worried though that they all kind of report up to one, and you would? I would think that this one that might be on another team.
When they start reporting all up to one, I don't think it's business loss they're worried about. It's reputation loss.
Yeah.
And so if you guarantee you do that, and I will embarrass your corporate your holding company CEO, you've got a leverage that you don't have in other circumstances.
But I think that for that to be viable, let's say take Norway as an example, since I'm a Norwegian, we would have to have the entire supply chain inside of Norway in order to make that happen. And that is not something we can do.
It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. We don't have the expertise. We don't have the industry. It's not going to happen. And obviously, if somebody who provides equipment for our critical infrastructure in Norway sells something with features that we would rather not have there, then no one in Norway needs to know about that. Those who need to know are those who are in the country who made it and those who sell it. Nobody in Norway needs to know. And that is also part of this. The service chains of the ICT industry is now such that every feature that is built into your system can be controlled from anywhere in the world. So whatever any small European country, to take those examples, put into the critical infrastructure, there need not to be anyone in Europe who is aware of the malicious actions that are done through that equipment.
Well,
unfortunately.
Let's switch over now to the asset owner side, because we have even more of them in the audience. I think if you start at the top level with the major teams, are we at a position, and you mentioned Huawei, we've seen similar issues with Kaspersky being limited where they can be sold because they're on the Russian team. You know, you have your Russian, your Chinese, your US teams at least. Are we at the position where in the next, 2 to 5 years, we expect each of the major teams to not buy critical infrastructure equipment from each other? Because right now in China, there are US ICS systems, same in Russia and such. Do we expect that to change in the next 2 to 5 years? What are your thoughts, Dan?
I'd say for the two examples in particular, Russia and China, I would say yes. China first. For other countries of less worldwide economic presence, probably not. Do you have to sign up to a team? Implicitly, although I don't suppose there's a contract line that says sign here and sign here and sign here. I don't think there's a contract line for that, but it's implicit. And do I think they will diverge? Yeah, I think they will diverge. I don't know how quick they will diverge, but I guess the real worry might be is do interoperability standards begin to diverge? Which, of course, if they do, that's in a sense answers your question. No, we're not interoperable. It's all us or not us, and there's a lot of that, I think, in the ICS arena. That in the medical technology arena, there's an awful lot of that. Medical record systems tend not to talk to each other. If that's viewed as a competitive advantage, it would be reinforcing.
But I think about your book, and I could see a case where there's interoperable systems, but there's still something so deep down in the code that yes, you may be able to buy a system in China and something in the US, but you could still have that special access feature buried deep somewhere.
Well, here's where, as an old security consultant, I say, well, what's your threat model anyway? Who do you think wants you bad enough to do this?
Yeah.
And if the answer is, well, I can't imagine, well, that's one thing. And if the answer is, we have 6 examples of this already, we're trying to avoid a 7th, that's a different thing. So I'd have to come back to you and say, well, what's your threat model? If it is diversion of information, data, that's one thing. If it is modifying hardware that's fielded that's another. If it is simply traffic analysis, which of course does not imply, for example, breaking encryption or any of the other really hard things, that's another. At some level, it becomes a counterintelligence problem.
Yeah.
But the question is that your threat model?
Do you see, Olav, do you see the possibility that we'll have a non-aligned team? Will there be someone who tries to say, we can serve everyone because we're not there, and in realpolitik, is that something that actually could be maintained, or would eventually, down deep, they'd be aligned with somebody?
This is a question of high politics. I'm not sure whether I'm an expert on that. My first inclination would be that it would be hard. And to your previous question, will the world divide? I fear that the answer is yes, because it's easy to see the forces that pull in that direction. It is not as easy to see the forces that pull in the opposite direction. I think we do not see, if you're in the chair of a CEO of a huge tech company now, you cannot build your business model on the assumption that the East and the West will trust each other. And we already see that in Europe, we see companies trying to sell their equipment for critical infrastructure, and they market the fact, or the alleged fact, that they have full control over the supply chain and it's all built in the West. We see both in the East and the West that technology expertise and our components, if you will, that is not built there. Well, there are huge investments now to make that happen. Whether Russia will be able to do this, it's not obvious to me, but definitely US and China, yes. As to the recent question, will it be possible to sort of be neutral and trust by everybody in this area?
Well, from an online point of view, one aspect of that where in a sense we're all unaligned at the moment is when vulnerabilities of a sufficiently public nature are discovered, they are made public. Now, there was a time when all vulnerability discovery was done by adventurers who wanted bragging rights. That is no longer the case. There are vulnerabilities discovered by people who don't want bragging rights and they don't share. But to the extent that unaligned organizations would want to, if they discover an anomaly that looks like it is intentional, would they share? And I hope the answer is yes, because that's where the power of many observers. It may not be true that with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Yeah. That may not be true. But with enough willingness, it may be true that there's a limited scope for intentional failures because somebody will stumble over it somewhere. And if they trumpet it, they tell him, they tell me, they tell you, they tell everybody out here, it limits the scope of silent operation, which is, I think, what you're most afraid of. From my point of view, the pinnacle goal of security engineering is not no failure, but no silent failure. And that's what we're talking about here, is silent failure. If you can say that we are committed, in some sense of we are committed that if we discover something, we won't be silent, I think that would go a long way. It's not perfect, but it would go a long way, and it certainly would be an unaligned kind of activity.
So maybe we'll end with your threat model. You say, what's your threat model? Should an asset owner that is of some importance, some sort of critical infrastructure or high-value asset owner, in their threat model, should they assume that at a minimum that the team that they're purchasing the system from will have a capability to do something to their system today, or you can answer that for today or let's say 3 to 5 years from now? Or is that too strong to say at this point in time? Did the question make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I'll say yes. Again, I'm a...
You're paranoid.
I mean, it's sort of a cliche, but I'm a professional paranoid.
Yeah.
Okay? So the nature of that is, should I assume an attempt will be made? Yes. Should I assume that at some level of skill an attempt will succeed? I think the answer is still yes. Should I assume that it would be discovered before the damage was critical? I don't know. Should it be discovered in a way that allows me to act without disclosing that I have discovered it? Now you're into murky territory. You know, the whole bit about methods and sources in the intelligence world, I think begins to apply here. If you're worried that such and such a device has this feature, and we don't want the opposition to know that we have discovered that it has this feature that they are using, now you're in definite murky water.
Okay. I'll give you the last word on this. What do you think in terms of what someone should expect if they buy equipment from the team, what the team's capability that they buy from?
I think the capability of those who sell you equipment is huge, regardless of how ethical, how nice they are. They come with firmware updates, they come with software updates, and even if they're 100% to be trusted at the moment of purchase, if they're 2 years down the line are not to be trusted anymore, their possibility for harming you is unfortunately huge. I don't really see a solution to that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I want to thank my guests here, and I believe we have, I think they arrived, 50 copies of your book that we'll have at the Cabana sessions on Wednesday, but please join me in thanking Dan and Olav for coming here today. Thanks, guys.